How do the best project managers plan their projects, and what can you learn from them? I wanted to know how the best project managers in the world create their project plans, and whether there are any useful lessons that can be shared with the rest of us. I'm not suggesting that any one description that they offer is the way for you. I recommend instead that you listen to all of their approaches and see what works best for you and your project.
I wouldn't start with how many people I need. I'd start with what's the work and how long does it take. Some jobs might need 2 or 3 people. Just you can't do it if you don't have 2 or 3 people. But some tasks might be faster if you added more people. Some tasks you could add more people, it wouldn't make any difference.
When you have quite a good notion of what the outputs of your project are going to be, and therefore what you can apply to your situation to know when is this going to be finished, how much is it going to cost, who's going to be involved.
Start big, get a feel, go down into the detail. Don't just rush straight down into the detail first. You'll probably lose sight of any constraints that you're going to be working around. You need to do them in parallel, and they need to complement each other as well.
I would say the way that you figure out the length of a project is to sit down and understand the goals of that project, what's required of that project, do some estimation on understanding your own process and estimating for that process, knowing the key players who will be involved, and putting some time constraints around it, right? So estimating tasks, maybe doing a work breakdown structure, coming up with an estimate for the work, and then translating that to a plan.
If you have a notion of the end outputs, first and foremost is create something called a product breakdown structure. So a product breakdown structure is what are the things that we need to make during the life cycle.
Break down the deliverables into the smallest chunks possible, and then you're estimating each chunk based on what people have done before, based on professional judgment of the people who'll be doing the task, and they will then be able to advise on what's being asked this time.
And I'm talking about using post-it notes at this time, just writing each of them on a post-it note, putting them down on a flat surface, whether that be a wall or a desk. Think about them in terms of a hierarchy. So what are the major products? What are the components that make that product up? So now you're sort of looking at the top of your diagram is the larger part. So if you're thinking about a hospital, it would be the walls, the departments, and then underneath you would have the corridors, the rooms, the equipment that is in each room. So it would be a sort of pyramid structure. What are the dependencies between that product and that product? What needs to be made first? So now you're starting to think about how you're making the products.
So you really need to understand the work and then think through, okay, what sort of resource is going to do this? Is it a named person? And often people will know that if you're asking them about the work, it's probably because them or that person or their team is going to actually be doing it. And then they may well say, it's going to take 1 person, 2 people, 3 people, and then you can juggle, because resources and money are something that you might have the option of adding more of. And if you can do that, then it might be faster. Or equally, if you don't have that money to play with, you might have to do it longer and just rely on having 1 person working slowly, getting the work done.
As you start forming that picture of these are the activities, these are the deliverables, this is what we're going to have to achieve, who we need to involve, whether it's internal, external people and things like that, you kind of, over the years and experience, you kind of build up a really good understanding and sizing and doing a rough order of magnitude around these things as well.
I prefer to meet with each of the subject matter experts or people who become workstream leads individually first, so I can better understand their chunk of activity, what it means, what it's going to take, and make sure they understand what they have to do. And then I will try to knit all of those responses together into something that becomes our project scope or becomes a high level plan. And then I'll bring everybody together to review all of that information and make sure the dependencies are in there, make sure people know what everyone else is doing so we don't have overlaps. But I think often the reason I choose to do that is because if you have a big workshop which is planning and you start in one area and it gets very detailed, you lose the attention of the people who are on the other side of the table.
Based on your holidays, based on bank holidays, based on your current BAU, how long will it take you to make that product? Because you told me it would be 2 days, but based on your constraints, if I said to you July, when could you start and finish it?
Okay, that's really useful information so far, and there's more to come. But if you like this kind of content, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of these kind of videos.
Resourcing is critical when you're planning, so you'll have to be creating a plan and keeping an eye on other projects that are happening within your portfolio and making sure that your team is actually available to do the work. So it's confusing.
Now you'd move on to how much is it going to cost to make that product. So this could be a monetary amount of money on the post-it note. So now what you're working towards is how much is the project going to cost in terms of making our outputs, the raw cost of the materials plus your people's time because you've done your who. And then what you can start to work towards is the last step in a planning procedure, which is creating your schedule.
So as a project manager, you can't figure it out by yourself. You can't just assume that you know all of this stuff, that you even know what the tasks are on it as part of the project. So you need to involve the subject matter experts who are doing the actual tasks and get them to tell you what's involved in the work and get them to tell you what it will cost in terms of time, money, and people. So your job as a project manager is to really facilitate that process and to ask all the questions to help people break down the work into its component parts and then give you some estimates that shape what that work will look like. And your job then is to write up those results into a consolidated schedule, linking each different component together so that the whole thing flows with all the dependencies in it.
So there will be some top-down planning. So we will have fixed dates that we can start from, finish by, aspirational dates, good old-fashioned right-to-left planning that we get from senior stakeholders.
A lot of times in agencies, you're handed a scope and told those things, and you have to work within the constraints to try to make it happen.
And you apply some of your tried and tested models to it. So put your project phases in and you run from right to left back. First and foremost, does that fit? Does that feel right? What's your gut telling you? And then you run it the other way. You then go from left to right. Does it make sense? Does it hit those aspirations? Can you give it a good kick? Give it a kick of the tires. Does it kind of make sense?
You go back to your customer. So let's remember that we were talking about they have an end date, they have a budget, but you've done your product breakdown structure, your work breakdown structure, your organizational breakdown structure, your budget, your schedule, and you do a comparison of the two back to them. And you say, this is your criteria about when you want this product done in this plan. This is the plan that we've done as a team. What are the differences? What can be negotiated?
It's a big process where you know what the project process is, you know how to build a great plan, but there are lots of things that can get in the way of you creating that plan really easily, right? Like people's time off, client schedules. I mean, a lot of times when I'm working with clients and I pull a plan together, I'll walk them through a plan and say, okay, so I'm allowing 3 days for you to provide feedback on deliverables. And so I'm talking about design deliverables and things that require them to have conversations and actually make decisions in order for a project to move forward. And sometimes they'll say, there's no way I can do that, especially in a large organization where there are not a lot of there are a lot of decision makers or a lot of people involved in the process. Things get complicated. So they start to extend timelines. And then I have to have conversations with them where I say, well, the timing in my plan is realistic for my team. If it's not realistic for your team and we have to extend the timeline, I'm not comfortable moving that time back on my side of deliverables. So that means that we're ending up at a later deadline that you want, which is not an easy conversation, but it's a necessary conversation because I have to protect the time of my team to make sure that we can get the work done at the quality that the client expects.
I would start high level, and then I add in more information as we get closer to delivery. I tend to use rolling wave planning, which is that process of adding in more information as you get closer to the time horizon, because it saves me time, and often it's very difficult to estimate in detail for many months in advance because we don't know exactly what we will have done by then. So we estimate in detail and flesh out the plan for the perhaps 6 weeks to 3 months that we can realistically plan with a high degree of confidence. I think the pieces of data that are most important to me when putting together that detailed project plan are the end date of when the work needs to be done by and the name of the task owner, and everything else can kind of be slotted in around that.
So yeah, planning can be complicated. I mean, it's simple, right? Like I tell people, anyone can make a plan. Not everyone can make a realistic plan because there's a lot to consider when you're actually creating a plan and you're vetting it with your team and with your clients, and you're managing it and maintaining it and honestly updating it and changing it over time, because we know the minute that you set a baseline on a plan, it's going to change. So yeah, that's kind of my point of view on planning.
If you want to know more about project planning, then click the video link here and I'll look forward to seeing you there.